Um, Hi, everyone. I'll echo that chat is available for you. If you have questions or comments as we go, please feel free to use the chat. We'll continue through the presentation today, but return to chat at the end of our conversation, and we hope to have lots of time at the end for questions and discussion. So, and thank you for the return to Texas. I am extremely happy to be here with you today, and it's lovely to see so many familiar names and faces. I am Michelle Reed. I'm the Director of Programs at Library Futures. I should double check that you can actually see my slides. Can you see my slides, Tova? Yes. Good. Okay. So I am the Director of Programs with Library Futures. Library Futures is a nonprofit project at the Engelberg Center on Innovation Law and Policy at the New York University School of Law. We provide fresh research, expert guidance, and meaningful education on digital rights to empower librarians, policymakers, and community leaders to advance and shape a fair digital future for libraries and their communities. So in our increasingly digital world, accelerated technological innovation, which I know you're all talking a lot about over the next 3 days, and unjust laws governing digital rights require us to confront new challenges that will shape the future of libraries as well as our society. One way that we do this at Library Futures is through our internship program. We currently have 5 absolutely amazing interns working with us. They have joined us from across the United States and Canada, and they have educational experiences and backgrounds in a very wide range of subjects. We've had law students, journalists, information science graduate students, geography majors, and educational technologists. And one of the students who worked with us over the summer was an opera singer studying voice performance. So they really are all over the map, but they do share an interest in technology, intellectual property, and of course, libraries. So you can find work from the previous cohorts who have worked with us over the last few years. All of it is published to our blog, and you can find that at libraryfutures.net. So my colleague Tova is one of our very talented interns who joined us over the summer and is continuing to work with us into the fall on a report, the report that we'll be sharing with you today. And she's lending her incredible writing and editing skills on some other projects as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tova now to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction, Michelle. Yeah, my name is Tova. I use she, they pronouns, and in addition to Library Futures, I just graduated from the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, South in Canada, geography program. And in addition to Library Futures, I also do research at the UBC Center for Climate Justice on federal climate policy. So it's been a really cool opportunity to work on this OER project with Michelle, and I'm really excited to share it with you all.
All right, so let's get started. So our topic today is, of course, open educational resources, but we're going to be focused on public libraries. And public libraries, as you all probably know, are not the type of institution that we are often talking about when we're talking about open education. But suspecting that OER could be relevant in the public library sphere, Library Futures surveyed the Public Library Association listserv in January of this year. Next month, we plan to release the full report from that study, so you're getting a sneak peek of all of the data and our findings. As far as we know, there has been no research so far that has addressed public librarians' use, awareness, or perceptions of OER, and that's what we hope this report will do. So we have a very deep association of OER and textbook cost, and that specific marketing pitch can mean that sometimes OER will write itself out of narratives of relevance for public libraries. And we did find that some people who responded to our survey were completely unaware of OER. And as you can see in this quote, this respondent said, until the survey, I never come across the acronym OER or the term open educational resources. However, we did find that OER awareness levels among public librarians were actually much higher than anticipated. So about 77% of respondents reported at least some awareness of OER. And surprisingly, we found OER adoption in public libraries is low, with only 16% of respondents stating that their library used OER. And 18% of respondents have applied a Creative Commons license to their own work, with multiple respondents attributing their use and creation of open content to the importance of accessible education in public libraries. We also asked about satisfaction among those who have used OER, and those satisfaction levels were very high, with agreement that OER are valuable additions to the library's collections. We asked about barriers, and with very similar trends in higher education, awareness and support were among the greatest barriers to OER use. And then lastly, we asked about interest in OER, which was extremely high. And we see this as a rich area for further education, development, and research. So I'm going to very quickly highlight some of the demographic data about the survey respondents, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tova for a deeper dive into those key findings. So first off, the survey was adapted from the digitally established 2023 Bayview Analytics report on OER. We received 107 usable responses during the survey's active recruitment period. And the largest population of respondents identified their libraries as suburban libraries. So you see here that's 41%. The other library types, city, town, and rural, were about evenly represented. We have a map of all of the respondents who responded, of everyone who responded to the survey. We had respondents from 18 states, with Maryland and Michigan most represented, with 8 respondents each. And you can see here, though, we are still missing representation from a pretty large section of the country. So there's still significantly more work that can be done to better understand this landscape. And then the last thing to know about the people who responded to our survey, we asked, in addition to location, we asked about years of work in public libraries, as well as the primary and secondary roles. And the highest number of respondents fell into the 11 to 20 year range at 34%. And the majority of them worked in management and administration at 38%, followed by reference at 23%. And I am going to now turn it over to Tova to dive into the findings.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so for librarians to use OER, they have to know about them. And so we gauged awareness of our respondents and found that 77% of respondents noted at least some awareness of OER, while only 10% were not at all aware of OER. So these are pretty good numbers, but they could also be the result of selection bias, because librarians that recognize the term might be more likely to click on a link and do a survey about it. I can imagine not wanting to do a survey about an acronym I'd never seen before. But yeah, we also wanted to see whether some factors that we asked about might correlate with higher OER awareness, including library size, library role, and years working in libraries, as Michelle said. And we found that librarians at the largest and smallest libraries in terms of service population were the most likely to be aware of OER, while librarians at libraries with like mid-sized service populations had the lowest rate of OER awareness. So it's in the middle at the 25,000 to just under 10,000 range. Yeah, and this could be something to collect further data about to get more insight into whether this is like actually a significant pattern, and if it is, why that may be. And yeah, we also looked at awareness by librarian role. A lot of librarians work across different fields and areas of the library, but this is just what they put down as their like primary role. And we found that although relatively few librarians working primarily in youth services responded to the survey with only 8 responses, those that did seemed to have a little bit of a proportionally greater awareness of OER than their colleagues in other specialties. Because you can see here that no youth services librarians were completely unaware of OER. All of them had like at least some kind of, they had all at least heard about them. Several respondents mentioned that in like the open response box, mentioned that they used OER for youth programming. And people might assume that youth services librarians might be the most aware of OER since youth services librarians are often seen as kind of like the closest to providing education in libraries in terms of like youth lessons, youth curriculum, youth programs, youth literacy training, etc. And so that seemed kind of consistent with our findings. We also found that librarians in collections, circulations, and technical services as like their primary area, they seemed to display the lowest OER awareness, with no respondents in that category listing themselves as very aware of OER and 3 expressing no awareness. Yeah, and this is interesting because it could suggest a key issue with widespread OER uptake in public libraries, because public services and like youth services librarians might see the most need for OER since they're kind of on the front lines of educating patrons. And then meanwhile, collections librarians are the ones that have the responsibility for building collections and budgeting for library resources, but they might have the least awareness of how OER could actually improve educational programming. So they might not be as aware or inclined to build that into collections processes. And this is something that librarian and scholar Elizabeth Shepard mentions in her work. So building awareness and interest in OER within like collections librarians could be important for integrating resources into library discovery systems so that other librarians and patrons can both discover and use OER to their fullest extent. And yeah, we also looked at correlation between librarians' years in the profession and their OER awareness. And yeah, we didn't find a significant correlation there. The largest group of study respondents had 11 to 20 years of experience in libraries, so that might just represent the group of librarians that are the most likely to be responsive to recruitment with the Public Library Association listserv. But it would be interesting to do a little more data collection here and see if there could be a correlation at all in any direction. Just because some respondents said that they learned about OER in their like master's programs. So it could be interesting to see whether newer librarians might have more access to education because they did their master's more recently, or whether it's possible that librarians that have been working for longer might have more awareness just by like learning on the job and through kind of like later professional development type stuff. So that would definitely be something that would be cool to look into with a little bit more data collection. It's also a real possibility that librarians might be more aware of OER than they seem because they know about aspects of OER, but just like not know that specific acronym. And so the survey asked about awareness of terms like public domain, copyright, and Creative Commons, which are all aspects of OER. And yeah, they did seem to express more awareness of some of the key IP terms that comprise OER than they did of the term OER itself. Over 75% of respondents were aware of public domain and copyright, and awareness dropped slightly for Creative Commons. And then meanwhile, only 6 respondents were very aware of OER, with 11 unaware. So this means that librarians might be using, creating, and promoting educational resources under open licenses, just without describing them as OER. So librarians seem to be aware of OER to varying degrees, but do they actually use them? That was our next question. And we found that for the most part of our respondents, not really. Of our survey respondents, only 16% of librarians said that their libraries have incorporated OER into their systems and programs. 48% said that their libraries had not, while 36% just didn't know. So this pretty small proportion of respondents that like have confirmed OER use in like a way that's integrated into their libraries means that it would be great to do further data collection to actually analyze trends to more decisively figure out what types of factors might correlate with higher OER adoption, to then figure out how we can promote it or just how we can make OER better to suit the needs of the libraries that are interested in using it. But yeah, we did look at the correlations between OER adoption and library size. And we did find that libraries with larger service populations, so that serve more people, are more likely to have incorporated OER into library operations than smaller libraries. But yeah, so for the librarians that do use OER, how do they use them? Based on like an open survey box where respondents talked about their library's OER use, we grouped those into three main categories, which were resource access, tech programs, and lesson plans. So three respondents mentioned directing patrons towards OER using links on websites and through reference services, which aligns with the kind of conventional role of librarians as connectors of patrons with resources. And in this quote from participants under the resource access heading, they mentioned that their library links to OER Commons and an OER database on their website for patrons to access. And similarly, librarians linking to public domain ebooks through sites like Project Gutenberg could also be considered OER integration, especially if those ebooks are for educational purposes like textbooks. That is one way that public libraries can be involved in OER. Three other participants mentioned tech programs, particularly using open content for maker programs. And I think we're likely to see this as a growing area in general and as a growing space for OER use in public libraries. Because a 2023 Public Library Association survey found that over 40% of public libraries currently have maker equipment. So that's like a key area that OER can plug into in the form of open curricula, open source software for teaching, etc. Yeah, and finally on the right, we saw the same number of survey responses connected to using OER for developing lesson plans. And yeah, similarly, the 2023 PLA survey found that 95% of public libraries offer digital literacy training. So that's a lot of libraries. It's a lot of trainings, and that means a lot of lesson plans. And another recent PLA survey identified the top two most pressing needs in library communities as literacy and educational achievement, so educational support, and digital equity, which is at 67%. So that's like tech training support and tech access support. So those both show that public libraries can have a really significant role in educating their patrons, which means that they need materials. Another thing that I should mention is that several respondents that mentioned that they use OER were actually talking about Creative Commons materials, so like open source images, or open licensed images, and they described those as OER. And those aren't actually OER, that's more describing open content. So that's also another interesting finding that a lot of respondents were conflating OER with open content. So that's definitely an area to maybe do more education around, but also it's cool to know that many librarians are kind of like familiar with open content for the purposes of creating marketing and promotion materials. But yeah, the categories of OER use that I just mentioned reveal not only distinct uses of OER, but they also clarify the really important role that public libraries play in education. So public librarians connect people to educational resources so that they can study for job applications, etc., for tech. They also provide resources for teachers within public library communities. So teachers might come to libraries looking for inspiration and materials to take back to their classrooms. And then libraries also serve as educators themselves through in-house educational programming, like the digital literacy and tech programs that I just mentioned. And a lot of the time when people think about education and the need for open educational resources, they just think about colleges and universities. So this really shows that public libraries could really have an important role in the OER space. But this is something that is pretty underexplored in existing OER research, which usually focuses on universities. But public libraries and colleges actually have a lot in common and potentially a lot to learn from each other. Next slide. Yeah, so a 2024 Lumina Foundation for Education report compared the resources offered by community college libraries and public libraries, including resources for technology, financial literacy, and career services. And they found that community college libraries and public libraries actually do share resources via access to like shared online collections. So there's more overlap than we might think. And public libraries can also partner with academic libraries to disseminate research about important like public health topics through like educational programming on yeah, various topics. And so while both community college libraries and public libraries, they provide overlapping kind of like resources tailored to their populations around like tech literacy, etc. The report actually found that the sample of public libraries on average were better about publicizing their offerings. So that shows an area where community college librarians could learn from their public counterparts in terms of publicizing and making open educational resources useful for the communities that they serve. And I'm going to pass it right back over to Michelle to talk a little bit about OER creation.
Okay, so OER creation, we know that open licensing is foundational to OER, and one way that public librarians can engage with open education is by making and openly licensing materials themselves. So we asked survey participants if they had ever applied a Creative Commons license or some other type of open license to their work. We got a pretty low yes on that, with only 18% reporting that they have created open content. Um, of those who have created open content, management and administration librarians and reference librarians were the most frequent open content creators. And you'll remember management and administration were also the category of respondents who replied most to the survey. So we need to take that into consideration as well. Um, Only 2 youth services librarians said they had applied a Creative Commons license to their work. So that's certainly a number that we would love to see grow over time. But we also wanted to know about those librarians who did openly license their work. Why did they do it? So we asked that question as well. And for some public librarians, creating OER is already part of their job, or they consider it already part of their job. While it's not part of the job description, librarians may see the work as a logical extension of their role or something that helps to meet the needs of their patrons. So what's on your screen now is a partial quote. The full quote is, "I feel it is important to share resources, especially in a public library environment. When developing a program and resources, I am already being paid through my employment. I therefore feel it is important to share my resources and program freely." That's from a community and outreach librarian. Respondents who said they applied Creative Commons licenses to their work also justified the decision by discussing education. So here is a local history librarian explaining that they applied Creative Commons licenses to their work because the content was created for educational purposes. And then we also had respondents stated that they use Creative Commons specifically and OER more generally to because they fit into the core vocational identity of librarianship. So that idea of providing access and assisting patrons with information and education. This quote is from a collections, circulation, and technical services librarian who said, "I strongly believe that information should be freely and equitably accessible." So all of this sounds very familiar, right? The values of education, of equity, of increasing access, and of doing all of these things just because it is very core to what we do as librarians. And I will pass it back over to Tova now to talk about perceptions.
Yeah, we also wanted to know how people use the OER that they have and how they feel about them. And we found that respondents who use OER are generally satisfied with them as valuable additions to the library's collections, with none disagreeing with OER's value. yeah, as you can see here, 77% were very satisfied, were satisfied. About 8% were like very satisfied. And then 15% were kind of neutral, but none of them disagreed that the OER that they have are valuable. So overall, pretty good approval. Um, on responding. Sorry guys,
Hey,
not sure what
Tova,
happened there.
you were frozen.
Oh no.
Can you pick back up at the start of this slide that we're on, the OER perceptions slide?
Yeah, totally. So sorry about that. Um, but yeah, I was saying that the 13 respondents whose libraries have incorporated OER noted that the OER that they used were mostly effective. And they were the most effective were the educational programs for patrons, with 8 respondents saying that OER were easy to use for training programs, 2 disagreeing that they're not easy to use, and then 3 neutral. um, OER effectiveness for instructor support. So using OER to provide resources for teachers that are and educators within the library community that had the weakest approval ratings from librarian respondents, with 6 participants satisfied, 4 non-committal, 2 unsatisfied, and 1 responding that it wasn't applicable to them. So that leads us to believe that OER for instructor support could be a good area to research more and support to maximize the potential of OER for open curriculum development, for the patrons that libraries serve. We also asked whether OER are cost-effective alternatives to proprietary materials. One of the key benefits of OER is their low cost. And of the relatively small population of public librarians who responded that they do use OER, most of them were satisfied with the cost and utility of the OER that they have. 85% of participants described OER as cost-effective alternatives to buying copyrighted educational materials, and none disagreed. So all of them are at least feeling decent about OER's cost effectiveness. It's also important to note that OER can definitely save costs of collections, but at the same time, it could require some like upfront costs and effort for programming and staff training and navigating open options. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. But yeah, as one management and administration librarian noted, concern over money spent on collections includes and is predominantly fueled by our virtual collections. So here we can see that OER can be a really powerful cost-saving intervention in cases where libraries are struggling with the costs of maintaining digital collections. So if they're not paying the steep fees, then they can spend that money in other areas. Yeah, so here we can see that the cost of collections is a problem for many libraries, and it's an especially significant issue for larger libraries. Over half of respondents from libraries that serve over 500,000 patrons cited cost of collections as a serious problem. And so to visualize this issue a little bit more, I made this map to show some of those areas where proprietary digital collections make up a sizable chunk of library spending. There's kind of a lot going on in this map, so I'll give you a second to look at it. But basically, the circles show places where digital collection spending comprises over 60% of a library's total expenditures. So the size of the circle also corresponds to the library's service population. So when you combine those two things, the circles and the size of the circles, We can see the places where more people are impacted by libraries that are having to spend a lot on digital collections, and so have proportionally less to spend on other priorities. And the color coding, so the light orange is places that are just spending like a little bit over half. Whereas the darker orange it gets, the more the library is spending on digital collections of their total budget. And so the majority of libraries are spending less than 60% of their collections budget on electronic materials. So a lot of areas in the country don't have any circles. But we can see that digital collections represent a significant area of cost, especially across the country, but with some notable hotspots in Puerto Rico, which you can see down here is like all dark red, Georgia, Texas, Florida, and Washington, D.C. So our research isn't really equipped to do a ton of kind of like analysis about why, but these are areas where OER could be an especially significant area to look into further, and to broaden our understandings of how things like local library funding, policy, library management, and librarian experience impact access to electronic collections, and where OER could be kind of like an interesting thing to look into as a way to alleviate some of those cost burdens. I'm going to pass it back to Michelle to talk about some barriers to accessing and uptaking OER.
Yeah, so speaking of burdens, I mentioned earlier that we asked about barriers for OER use. This was a multiple choice question with the option to write in other barriers in addition to the options that we provided. Awareness issues were the biggest reason respondents selected for not using OER. Over 60% of the respondents selected some type of awareness barrier as impediments, with not aware of OER receiving the most responses at 36%, and don't know others using OER receiving the second most at 25%. There were lots of opportunities for open-ended responses. This quote is from a programming and instruction librarian, and it really sums up the barrier landscape well. Again, this is a partial quote that you're seeing on the screen. I'll read out the whole thing. The biggest barrier to these resources for me personally is just knowing about them. Many aren't integrated into our collection, so they rely on staff sharing them with each other and then remembering to look for them in our personal saved reference materials. So there we're seeing these issues with collection and discovery systems, as well as awareness support and time. Again, things that we've seen in other surveys and studies investigating how other groups of stakeholders have engaged with OER. If a library has significant collections budget, but insignificant staffing, it might be easier just to purchase materials than to ask librarians to spend time developing OER collections or to spend time educating their users or patrons about OER. So this, again, is another partial quote from a collections, circulation, and technical services librarian who says, "It is easier with existing processes in place to purchase materials than use OER. Our library uses just a fraction of what could be done. We have not done much to teach or provide programming about OER. This is where public libraries could help spread knowledge." And as we've seen in higher education and other landscapes, these are not impossible challenges, but they do require building a culture that empowers staff with the necessary knowledge to identify, access, and use those open resources. Because these activities are often not an explicit part of the public librarian's job descriptions, bringing OER from these individual projects to institution-wide implementation requires extra work, education, and initiative. So I am going to turn it once more over to Tova to show us why these barriers are actually a sign of promise and hope for public librarians in this space.
Yes. So, although OER had uneven awareness, uneven uptake, we did ultimately find that people are hungry to learn more. And yeah, respondents' interest in OER was extremely high, at 97% interested in learning more. Um, and that represents that OER are a rich area for further education, development, research, and conversation. So it's great that we're doing this right now. And we're about to do some more conversation when we start taking some questions. But yeah, 97% were interested, and 28% said that they were very interested. And then about half took action to actually actively learn more by signing up for follow-up information from this research project. And yeah, that interest suggests a landscape of really high alignment with the values of OER. Librarians are interested, librarians are engaged, but just not having the personnel capacity or development opportunities or funding or et cetera to support actually implementing them. So that's definitely part of the next step. I'm gonna pass it off to Michelle to give some kind of like on the ground examples of how public libraries are using OER to educate patrons and do some exciting innovation.
Okay, so this next section is a kind of a rapid fire look at how the existing OER that we used in higher education and in our K-12 systems can be used in public libraries and how those connect to the work that public libraries are already doing. So we'll start with one of my favorite examples. Since OER Commons came up a few times in our survey responses, I want to start with a real public library OER initiative that uses that repository to house its collection, the Naked Place at Baltimore County Public Library provides openly licensed materials for easy science, technology, engineering, and math projects, as well as resources for librarians and other educators to develop training, programming, and curricula. One lesson in the Naked Place provides instructions and learning objectives for a space lesson on making asteroids you can eat, which is mashed potatoes. And if we were not meeting virtually, I would have mashed potato asteroids to share with all of you. So just imagine that we're eating asteroids. Other collections provide lessons on 3D printing, machine learning, Lego robotics, video game coding, and worm herding, which is my favorite thing to talk about. I did not know worm herding was a thing, but it is. So moving into writing programs and support for that type of programming, the Open Textbook Library is another go-to resource for locating open materials, and there's an abundance of writing resources there that would be of interest to a wide variety of writing groups. So here I have featured elements of creative writing, which includes exercises for practicing the essentials of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Technical writing offers tips from writing emails and memos to proposals and progress reports. And then with the Best Cover Award, Writing Fabulous Features includes a learning features framework that could be repurposed and republished to highlight a local writing community. Moving into food, since we've talked about edible asteroids, texts like chemistry of cooking could complement food literacy initiatives in public libraries, such as this nutrition, education, and healthy cooking class. And then OER game-based and adaptive learning strategies could guide the development of coding camps like the Teen Summer Program at Long Beach Public Library. And books like Speak Out, Call In could help community members prepare for public speaking events like the Slam and Rhymes Challenge at the Indianapolis Public Library, or they could be used to supplement public speaking resource kits. So the last example I will share, and this is not an OER, but an opportunity, I think, for OER. There's lots of opportunity for public libraries, social workers, public health organizations, and the institutions that educate these professions to partner on programs like the one that is currently underway at the San Francisco Public Library. This February, the Associated Press reported that most of the library's stolen books were about recovering from addiction. So, recognizing the library's need to replenish this area of their collection on a regular basis, the library launched a pilot program to distribute free addiction recovery books. And at the date of that AP publication, they had distributed more than 3,200 books and spent about $48,000 on the program, with legislation proposed to expand distribution from 3 to 28 of the city's libraries. So at conferences like this that recognize the value of open practices grounded in localization, contextualization, and collaboration, I think it's important to imagine the possibilities of projects that could empower those library communities to customize resources with information about local support for addiction recovery, as well as community stories that reflect the diversity of voices from a specific geographic region. So I ask if all of you, if open pedagogy has the potential to increase student engagement in the classroom, could a similar agency-oriented approach allow recovering addicts to not only connect with a book, but to also see themselves in its setting and its language and its voices? So this is a quote from Keith Humphreys, a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University and former White House senior drug policy advisor in the Obama administration. He said, "For some addicted people, reading a recovery book can be the first time they feel understood and the first time they feel some hope." And that is what we'll leave you with. So that's all we have to share with you today. Again, the full report will be available on the Library Futures website. If you would like to receive a notice whenever it is available, please go to the website, sign up for our newsletter. It's fantastic. And you will get a ping whenever the report is out in the world. And I see we have perfectly timed. We have 15 minutes left for questions and discussion. I saw a few things come through chat, so I will pause and take a look at that, but also feel free to unmute, come on camera, and we can talk more about all of this. Did anyone on the call have a question they want to unmute and ask, or should I head straight to chat or comment? So I'm seeing a question from Alan. Hello, Alan. Are you still there? Hi. Were there any unexpected surprising uses or effort in OER by public librarians, or things that are less common in higher education library OER activity? Tova, I'd love your thoughts on this too. There wasn't anything particularly surprising to me. I think public librarians are using OER in very similar to the way that everyone else uses OER. What we expected to see and did see was there is a lot of reliance on OER for 3D printing and maker spaces, that kind of activity. And I think we'll continue to see that. I also don't think it was terribly surprising that such a high number of people used open content more broadly for marketing and promotional materials. So we asked about, or what formats are you using? And so we saw people using things across the board. There was music, there was images, there was video, in addition to lots of text-based stuff. So nothing terribly surprising or out of the ordinary. Then I think the thing that was the most surprising wasn't the use cases, but was the high level of awareness among the respondents. So, but did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, not really. Yeah, I think the use cases are really where the kind of like innovative applications of OER for public libraries shine, which I think also just kind of like highlights the innovative ways that librarians and educators are, I think, engaging youth during this era of sort of like online learning. Um, and yeah, I think that it's also really interesting how public libraries were able to support in education at a time when like the public school system and parents and like youth were so strained. So that's definitely something that I think would be cool to look into more when looking at how OER in public libraries maybe differs or supplements OER in higher education.
Tian says, I can see public librarians sharing OER with students asking for textbooks on certain topics. That would be a cool way for academic and public librarians to partner to support access to textbooks, or for helping high school students access college textbooks to get ahead of the game. Absolutely. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Hi, Alan. You found something in the make it place. That's excellent. Okay, that's all of the questions I see in chat. Do we have any from the group? Ariana, hello. I hope you're having a great conference so far.
Hi, thanks, you too. One, I think you may have touched on this, so apologies, but what are some of the next steps with this research, do you think?
So then the next immediate step is to get the report out into the world. So as we've noted, the sample size was small, and there's certain parts of the country that are completely underrepresented. There's some categories of librarianship or roles within public libraries that weren't as well represented as others. So this was really exploratory in establishing a baseline data set that we can measure against. Additional data collection would be great. Talking to people about those use cases and getting more detail about what that looks like is something that Tova and I have talked a little about. So what we got from the survey was very brief. And so getting a better understanding of what that looks like in practice and expanding some of those use cases out into case studies feels like something that would be a useful effort. But right now again, it was just does anyone care about this first? Because it's a gap, right? So we're helping to fill that gap. And so far what we've seen is that public librarians are interested in this. What we would like to hear from funders and foundations is, are they also interested in this? And if so, like, this is an area where we would like to see some funding. And if so, I think there's tons of things that you could do to move this forward. And research is a part of that. But then building out a robust professional development opportunities for these public librarians that focus specifically on them, and finding a support network for them so that they can connect with each other and learn from each other in the way that all of us have done for so long.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi.
I'll put on my global hat. Any idea or way you can think about outside of the US for places where public libraries are still obviously very important?
Yeah, I'm gonna need some help from Tova on this. I know we looked at some international research when we were working on the report, and specifically at some areas where collections are underdeveloped, or where we looked at the map of the US earlier, right? Where there's places where virtual collections just cost a ton and a lot of money is being spent there. But we've also looked, and I don't think it's in the report as much as it could be, where there's places that are even more resource strapped, and there's already a connection there with OER and the benefits of OER and bringing those into communities and collections. So I presented, as you know, Alan, I presented very early data about this report. It was like my presentation at OE Global was about a week after we closed the survey. So we didn't have this level of data analysis, and Tova hadn't joined us yet. So it was very preliminary, but there was interest in the room on expanding that conversation in a global setting. And I did get some comments after the presentation on essentially like our public librarians aren't doing this work either, and I should have this conversation with them. So people who have worked in the library space and or have friends who are librarians wanting to go out and bring them into community around OER. So I think there's opportunity, but again, with everything in public libraries, and this is what I've heard a lot, not even connected to OER, but generally about working with public libraries, is that there's a lot of a caution and guarding against scope creep specifically. And so I think that's a concern, and something that as we consider how to reach out to public librarians and to kind of welcome them into community, how do we ensure that this isn't an add-on responsibility, but is something that is beneficial to them and not just an add-on role and exhausting.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And I'm still very interested, and I know we bounced a few emails, but I still would like to rope you in for some conversations with our global community.
Yes, I would be happy to do that. Hi, Carrie.
Jumped on at the very end. I apologize. Been bouncing
Oh
around.
no, it's great. It feels like coming home in some ways, right? It's like all of these familiar faces. It's so nice being at open education conferences again. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? I will say in the time that we have left, I presented a much shorter version of this. It was a 10-minute Spark talk, but I presented at oh gosh, the Association of Rural and Small Libraries last week or the week before, and did these are all public librarians. I did a poll in the conference app, same question about interest in learning more, and we had the same distribution of interest, so very high interest levels there as well. So I do see this as a very positive sign that people are eager to learn more. Again, it's just matching matching the time commitment with and the professional development opportunities with what people need and have time for. And the question I got, and this is, I guess, another next step, I got a question from the group about if there was a list of OER that I could direct them to. So I directed them to a few places and a few LibGuides in particular. But I haven't seen anything that's been curated specifically for public librarians outside of the Make It Space Commons, which is specifically for makerspaces. I haven't seen anything that was made just for public librarians, and so that seems like a fantastic project if someone is interested in putting that kind of resource list together. It's clearly people would benefit from it and would like to see something like that. Should we say our goodbyes now, Deanne?
Yeah, I think I can go ahead and just mention that there is a discussion board through the attendee hub. So if you want to keep the conversation going from today's session, jump in there. It's Keep On OER Talking, Texas and Beyond. I feel like this is going to come up again. Thank you so much, Michelle and Tova. This was such a fascinating presentation. It was so interesting to see, and it really is an area that's not talked about a lot. So I think there are a lot of opportunities here. So I really enjoyed it very much, and thank you for presenting. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.